Hi, I'm Linda Velasquez of Greenroofs.com. It's my pleasure to introduce keynote speaker Charlie Miller, PE, and principal of Roof Meadow. Formerly Roofscapes, Inc., Charlie and his groundbreaking company have been the recipients of numerous awards in trend-setting green roof excellence. I've known Charlie since 1998, when I was still a student of landscape architecture, and I contacted him to pick his engineer brain about these mysterious green roofs I've been seeing across Germany. Along with Tom Lipton and Katrine Scholz-Bart, Charlie was one of my first, if not the first, professional contact I had within the green roof world, and I'm really grateful to all three. From the beginning, Charlie was warm, open, and encouraging, and helped my research quite a bit by sharing construction details, drawings, and his built project experience to this novice. Driven by passion and based in science, his philosophy and work ethic are par none. He's been a true pioneer and leader in our field here in North America, and an incredible inspiration for me personally. I'm sure the same can be said from many of you who either know of him or of his excellent work. We're very proud to have Charlie as our opening keynote speaker for our inaugural Green Roofs and Walls of the World Virtual Summit 2011. Charlie will now share with you a new place. Enjoy.
I'm Charlie Miller. My company is Roof Meadow, formerly Roofscapes. We've been around for almost 14 years, and in that time, we've been involved with projects of all types, all scales, all over the United States. From our base in Philadelphia, we support a network of licensed contractors that benefit from the experience we've gained over those years. In the following presentation, I'll be making 2 points. The first is how important it is to shed our biases and prejudices about how green roofs should be designed and operate, and address each project on its own merits, understanding this is a new and unique environment to be working in. And second of all, how important it is to maintain these projects and stay invested in their success. Thank you very much. Over history, pioneers have moved into new places and colonized them, thinking that they recognize them or aspects of these new places based upon the worlds that they had left. Because they brought these prejudices to this new endeavor, many times opportunities were missed and occasionally disasters ensued. Americans in recent years have discovered a new place that's been hiding in plain sight right in our big cities. The great landscapes, which could be part of our world, which are the rooftops of our buildings in our urban environments, what I'll call the urban plateau. The question is, will we be impeded in the efficient use of this new place by assumptions that we bring from our experience with landscapes on the ground, or will we avoid mistakes and be able to better take advantage of these environments by looking at them for what they are and adapting our approaches to landscape based upon the specific characteristics of this new environment? There are many assumptions that are common that have informed the approach that's been taken over recent years in developing green roofs. And let's just start with the simplest of all of these, and that is the seemingly obvious assumption that a landscape is a landscape is a landscape, and what we're talking about here is simply transporting an environment that we understand implicitly, that we grow up in and understand from our own experience, and transporting that to the top of a building, to an elevated environment. Let's explore that assumption. What are the characteristics of a ground landscape which we all take for granted? Let's take a really simple landscape. Let's take a landscape which is a grassy area with a swale running down through the middle. Some of the characteristics of this environment are that we expect to see, when it rains heavily, the water will run off of this landscape, what we call surface runoff, and run into channels or swales, which we call runoff discharge. And our understanding of what's happening with water on this landscape is primarily what we see on the surface. Water that soaks into this landscape we call infiltration. And infiltration, for most of us, is water which escapes our view and interest entirely. It becomes the province of the hydrogeologist and more esoteric considerations about how moisture and water is managed in the environment. In a green roof, by contrast, very little surface runoff is expected to occur. A well-designed green roof, except in the most extreme circumstances, won't experience surface runoff. The water that seeps into the green roof is the water that we're concerned about. It's not the water that's lost and out of mind, it's the water that ends up in the gutters. So we're not talking about surface runoff. The term itself is meaningless with green roofs. We're talking instead about, let's call it, underflow. What happens in terms of the plants that live in these environments? On a ground landscape, in many cases, the depth that the roots will grow, the experience that the plants have in terms of using moisture is based upon their natural root depth. Different plants have different root depths. The water that these plants access, for the most part, is water that infiltrates again from the surface and soaks down into the landscape. By contrast, in a green roof, we're designing an environment that has a bottom to it. Roots can't grow the way they would normally grow. The moisture that's being accessed by these plants is water that is flowing in this mysterious, unseen subsurface environment, which we design and manage in a specific way. So how we design that unseen environment, the layers and the underdrain layers of our green roof have a fundamental impact on the types of plants and landscapes that we can create and how they will prosper. It's fundamentally different than a ground landscape. For those two reasons alone, I think we have to conclude that ground landscapes are quite different than green roofs. In fact, green roofs are not appropriately designed and evaluated on the basis of what we know about ground landscapes. What's a paradigm that would be more appropriate? I would argue that we're looking at a shallow groundwater system. Let's take a forest, another simple example. In most forests, in most rainfall conditions, the water soaks into the forest litter, never becomes surface runoff, instead finds avenues for water to flow in shallow groundwater systems and emerges at streams and low points as seeps and springs. The time that it takes a drop of water to flow on a surface landscape from point A to point B will be perhaps a tenth of the time it takes that same drop of water to soak into a forest floor and find a groundwater channel and work its way toward its discharge at the spring. I would argue that in our focus on what we can see on the surface, we are ignoring half or more of what's going on in green roofs. Most of the water which is traveling, being managed in green roofs, being accessed by the plants in those green roofs, is traveling at various rates and in various ways through the layers of the green roof system. So until we start taking the design and the properties of these other unseen elements of the green roof and look beyond the surface of the plant foliage that's involved, we're not going to really be able to optimize and take best advantage of this particular environment, both in terms of the landscape that we can create in terms of their beauty, but also in terms of their functions, in terms of mitigating flooding impacts and improving water quality. There are other assumptions which I think are commonplace in our industry, which should be questioned, and if not questioned, can lead to errors in design. One of these is that once you establish plants, in this case on a green roof, given a very minimal amount of maintenance, that we should expect these environments to grow in richness and biodiversity over time. This, in fact, goes against the observations that are right in front of us in projects that have now been around our country and around the world for decades, and that is, left to their own, with minimal management, green roofs will continue to be living green environments on roofs. However, there is almost an inexorable decrease in the biodiversity over time. And therefore, to manage a green roof in order to improve biodiversity involves intervention from its human occupants and managers. Another often stated assumption or believed assumption is that native or indigenous plants that have grown up in a specific locality, are the natural plants to select when choosing plants to colonize this new environment. The problem, of course, is the environments in this new place, in these urban plateaus in our cities, has very little in common with the environments in which these native plants have grown up. As a result, these plants are unlikely to survive in the long term, and if left unmanaged, it is very likely that these environments will become bare ground sorts of communities. Again, communities which retain functionality but do not live up to the idealistic expectations that come from transporting a native rich landscape into this elevated new environment in the roofs of our cities. So what mistakes do we make by thinking about green roofs in terms of things that we think we know about ground landscape? I would argue that one of the most often repeated mistakes is to assume that if 3 inches of soil or media is good, then 6 or 8 must be better, right? This is unfortunately or fortunately not the case. Oftentimes, especially when we're trying to create an environment which is suitable for the plants which are best suited for these environments, we are choosing plants which are shallow rooted and therefore actually do much better in shallow soils, deep soils. And by adding deep soils, we're actually encouraging the incursion of what we would call weeds, unfavorable plants, which are ultimately going to potentially crowd out and make management of these green roofs more difficult. As I've mentioned already, because we're so focused on the concepts of surface runoff and surface moisture management, we often almost completely ignore the very complicated physical properties of the layers that are in the lower layers of these systems, which are really most responsible for how water moves through them, moisture is used, and how plants can utilize that moisture. Because we are in a hurry, and we're always in a hurry to create an environment which is in our mind's eye, our ideal, the notion of creating an instant landscape, in fact, the very concept of installing a landscape, which is so common in our world today, is particularly ill-suited to green roofs, where these environments need to be nurtured, kept track of, guided in the process of achieving the objectives that we have set for them. One of the things that we do is to emphasize rapidly colonizing plants, which are often plants which are not suited to long-term viability and stability in these environments. And a related issue to this, there's almost a complete absence of the use of annual reseeding plants in green roof design, a potentially really powerful I would say, a maintenance method and management method which can greatly increase the color, the excitement, the biodiversity, the food value of these environments, using plants which are not intended to be perennials but are intended to be continually reintroduced or reseeding ephemeral aspects of these landscapes. Mistakes we might make in engaging with the green roof design and installation may be based upon misconceptions that we bring from our knowledge of ground landscape. But other mistakes may stem from approaching the whole process from the wrong point of view. I would argue that it would be a mistake for us to approach this with the idea that we are recreating something that's been destroyed. When we build our cities and displace the environment, that environment's gone. It's not coming back. What we are doing is building a new environment, one that is based upon our human aesthetics and needs and goals. I would say that building, greening our cities in general should not be about an act of atonement for the environment that we have destroyed in our wake. This should be fundamentally and first of all a very optimistic, positive human adventure about creating a new and better world for ourselves, and not saving nature so much as saving us with nature as our partner. I think all of us engaged in this industry, while we understand and hold as important the potential value of green roofs and urban greening in general, to reduce flooding, to reduce urban heat island impacts, to improve our environment in general. A fundamental aspect of this is a new transformative process in our cities, which will make life potentially better for all of us by reconnecting us to our sense of place in the world and a sense of intimacy with nature. So, aside from being an engineering solution or a political solution, this is an imaginative solution to what we want our cities and our lives to be like in the future. I describe this process as being city terraforming. You look at most of our gray cities today, and they appear at a glance to be fundamentally barren environment from the standpoint of incorporating nature. We have the opportunity through new tools with green roofs and also low impact measures that we can introduce at ground level to transform this environment in a green way. I would say that this process is also completely in harmony with our national political objectives of the moment. One of the wonderful things about where urban greening has occurred and does occur in the world is it fosters a lot of small construction and small industry. A lot of this work is done in small scales and tight spaces and retrofit environments. These are exactly the sorts of jobs which are what we need in our world today. So this is a job, this is a program which is progressive in its nature and should appeal to people which have a progressive bent. Also, because it fundamentally is implemented by individuals and corporations on their own property, giving them complete free rein in terms of what these installations look like, how they feel, how they address a particular personality and point of view of these businesses and individuals. It is a very individualized process, which is a libertarian program. And finally, by reducing the overall cost for all of us by implementing a new type of infrastructure which is more durable, more sustainable in the long run. We should be pleasing the fiscal hawks in our political spectrum. When we address this process of city terraforming, we have to have before us an ideal of where we're headed. We have to have a goal to shoot for. So that means we have to interject our imagination and creativity into this process. Fundamental to making this process a success, we have to know where we're going. However, we've already been there in many places. So this is now a process which has been underway around the world for several decades. There are tremendous, wonderful, large-scale examples of how green roofing and city greening and sustainable construction can be done on a large scale, and what its potential impact is, not only from an engineering standpoint, but from a aesthetic and personal standpoint. So we invest our imagination, and we can be inspired by what has already been done and encouraged by that. So why green roofs as opposed to other green measures? And when we think about transforming our cities. Before you is a picture of what urban dwellers have come to love in our cities, these little park areas in the middle of dense cities, respites from the sound and the noise and the heat of the city. These are escape capsules that we have built in our cities, and this is how we think about city greening. However, if you're going to change the fundamental feel and look and performance of a city, you have to think about how that can be done. And the only way that that can be done is to incorporate green roofs as part of that package, where this unused, underappreciated component, this new place in our cities, can be transformed to create a fundamentally different urban environment. And we can see this happening now before us. There are projects scattered around the country where the abstract idea of a transformative approach to urban development. Fortunately, we have some great examples in front of us at the moment of how this process of transforming the city can occur, both in terms of retrofit projects, in terms of new construction. And the more we invest in this and we are exposed to this process, the more familiar and valuable it will appear to us, and the more common sense it will make. There is such a dramatic change that's possible, both on the immediate scale of being on a green roof and also on the change that it works on the city itself. One of the shining examples, one of my favorite of all examples of this process, was the construction of Potsdamer Platz in what had become no man's land in Berlin. And in this area, which is all new construction, the city is greened at all levels, at rooftop level, at terrace level, and at the ground level. It is a dynamic example of how a modern landscape with modern sensibilities and aesthetics can incorporate and utilize landscape as to make the environment more humane and more natural and functional. So the fundamental idea I would like people to take away from this address is that green roofs are about us, and that is seen most dramatically in the small spaces we create, these intimate spaces open to the air. And there are many of examples of these, and each one, as I've mentioned before, can be tailored to the needs of the individual, and I would say the pocketbook of the individual as well. Some of the pictures that I'm showing you show the sort of range of environments which can be created, which are small but intimate yet green, and really can completely change the experience of being in a building, around a building, on a building. In addition to these small spaces, we have the large spaces. These are the ones that we rely upon mostly for changing the way the city operates. These are the ones which change its hydrology, which are most apt to modify its climate, but which are also most likely to change the look and feel of the city as it's seen from the air or seen from tall buildings. A good example of that, one of the first examples of that, was the Chicago City Hall project shown here. This is an environment which is large enough, and environments like it, which can actually have some habitat. They're also the ones that are most likely to provide some modest benefit to other animals other than ourselves that can take advantage of the food value and the shelter that's offered by these particular projects. The fundamental difference between these environments and the ones on the ground is these are like each a little volcanic island, which is going to take years or decades for it to find its place in this archipelago of scattered green spaces in our cities. And actually, one of the exciting aspects is it will be determining exactly how this new transformation of this plateau will benefit not only us, but other creatures that we share the world with. One of the points that I frequently make is that green roofs are an aspect of a building which is going to continue to change, that it's going to continue to improve if and only it's managed and cared for by the human beings that care for it. But given that kind of attention, these buildings will age with us, improve with us, become part of our permanent urban environment. In closing, I would like to argue that green roofing is most like agriculture of all the sorts of human activities that we're familiar with. And that is because green roofing requires an ongoing investment and commitment and interventions to keep them functioning properly, to looking beautiful, to serving the needs for which they're being created. And that process is important because the environment that we have created from our own imaginations is going to require our continued care. On the other hand, the benefits that we will reap from that are so great. The capacity for us to realize all the potential benefits of green roofs depends also upon us shedding our preconceptions and biases and prejudices about what this environment really is. Look at the urban plateau and its particular characteristics and determine what opportunities it offers and how it should best be managed and how we should develop a strategy for greening them which is respectful of and consistent with that environment. The more we attempt to impose an idealized, unrealistic understanding of what these environments are, the less successful we will be. This whole process of urban greening, including green roofs, is one of the potentially most creative, challenging sorts of enterprises that we have before us, and one that can involve everyone. It can be done by the in the simplest scale on residences. It can be done on the massive scale of industry and institutions, and all part of a quilt of green that can transform the cities that we live in. So I invite everyone to take a few steps back, look at where we are, where we've come, learn from our mistakes, and envision what our future might be. Thank you.